I'll email him that link again, Sean, there.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Sean, there's 80 people in now, so.
Okay, so will we kick off? Okay, so good evening, folks, and you're very, very welcome. You'll have to bear with us a little bit here because this is a learning curve for us, and we have thought about trying to do a Zoom meeting with a while, but we just didn't have the courage for it. But anyhow, on our first attempt, I think we've been overwhelmed by the attendance. We were saying if we got 20 or 30, it would be a great attendance. We have, as we speak at the moment, over 80 participants on screen. If you arrow across to the right from the middle of your screen, you can move across 4 different screens to see you'll see the 4 different screens of the amount of participants that are involved. I'd like to especially extend our welcome to John Paul O'Brien, who's listening to us from Toronto, Canada, at 3 o'clock in the day, I believe. And also Eugene O'Sullivan is I believe is on board from the UK. Can I just start by just a little bit of housekeeping rules in order to keep some bit of order to this, because as I say, we are only learning on it. So as the host from a society point of view, I mute everybody. So whatever noise or talk goes on in the background is muted out, because otherwise we would have 80 different sound drops coming in, which would make it impossible to conduct the meeting. So if you look at the bottom of your screen in the middle, some of you may be well familiar with this, but I just want to briefly run through it. There's a little box called chat. And if you click on the chat box, you can type in comments while people are speaking, or you can type in questions or suggestions, or you can type in any questions you might have about a speaker or about an event or whatever. So that's just an additional facility, because there is no way we're going to be able to get around to taking questions virtually from this amount of participants. So it's just, I'm making you aware of it, that if you just go down, click on the chat, and then there's a column comes up either on the right hand side or across the bottom, and you can type in your questions or or any comments that you might have there. It makes it a little bit easier. We might not get to all of them, but we'll have a look at them again later, and we'll certainly endeavour to try and come back to everybody in as much as we can. By all means, if somebody wants to add a comment or come in the conversation, if they either, I don't think raising your hand will do, because you could be on a different screen and I won't see you. So if you just mention your name, and I will see the box light up and I can go to you then. But firstly, make sure to go to the corner of your screen and unmute yourself, because we sometimes might be able to see somebody speaking and we can't hear them. So if you have a question, and I'd like some to come in board as we go along, go to the bottom corner, unmute, and you'll have the question. The full participants can hear your question, and whoever that is directed to, or one of the speakers will, I'm sure will come back to you. So can I just very briefly introduce myself? I'm Sean O'Connor. I'm here this evening deputising for Dennis O'Brien, who is chairman of the Kilbrittain Historical Society. But Dennis has an article on this evening's events, so I'm just filling in that gap. We are a society which is about 5 years old, and I suppose we originally started off just bringing out a journal, gathering local events and history, and again it grew and grew each year to what we'd like to think now is a journal that we are very proud of, and there's 5 volumes of it there, and people are enjoying it, and it's something a little different in the parish, and people are enjoying it and getting, contributing into it, and I think it's something that hopefully we'll be able to build on. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we weren't able to have a journal in December of 2020, but we're hopeful that this will that we'll be able to do a journal again to come out the back end of 21. So that's a little bit about us. Again, as I said to you, the attendance is much more than what we anticipated, but we're delighted to get that kind of an attendance. Maybe this is the way forward, and I can see a lot of people there are very relaxed, sitting down and in the comfort of their own home without having to come out on a bad night. So our plan was, if this is going to work for us, that we would run one each month for February, March, April, May and June. And then hopefully at that stage that we'd be able to get out to doing a couple of field evenings and a couple of events again. But as I say, if it works well for us, that we'd fall back to doing the likes of the Zoom evenings again towards the back end of the year. So that's really a little background about what we're doing. Just for this evening, what we have put together is we have 3 different clips of 3 events that happened in the parish 100 years ago, which was in January 1921 and in February 1921. I think, if COVID wasn't around, it would be a very different celebration or anniversary. And I think we owe it to the people of those events 100 years ago to at least commemorate them. So while we're doing it in a different way to what we had anticipated, I think it's important that we are having this event and acknowledging them. And I think the high number of participants tonight is testament to that. The 3 events that we're going to speak about this evening is firstly the shooting of Daniel Reilly from Kilbrittain. The second is the shooting of Paddy Crowley from Kilbrittain. And the third is the infamous Christian Leanabh, all of which happened in January and February 100 years ago. Grania Barrett, who is a member and a committee member of the Historical Society, has narrated a piece to support the slides on Daniel O'Reilly. Con McCarthy, who is a long-term member and a historian, is going to, has narrated a piece behind the slides on Paddy Crowley. And Dennis O'Brien, our chairman, has put together a very nice video clip on the events of Krishna Leanabh. So we propose to share the screen. So for the purpose of what's going to happen now, I will share the screen and we'll bring up a video, the first video clip, which is Daniel O'Reilly. We will then move on. Now this clip is 4 minutes. We will then move on to the second clip, which is from Con McCarthy on Paddy Crowley. And then we're going to stop then and maybe have a conversation. If you feel, if there's anything you'd like to put to the speakers, or if there's anything you'd like to put out there to the panel, to the attendance tonight, by all means. Again, I'm conscious of the crowd, so I may have to mute people, and it's not being ignorant, but it's trying to keep the meeting together. And we'll refer to the chat box if there's messages gone in there, so use that one as well. So while we'd like some participation, we're going to try and have to keep it balanced. We'll try and keep the conversation or this evening's meeting to about an hour. If it goes a bit more, there's no major issue. If anybody is tight on time and has to leave, they can exit the meeting themselves, and that doesn't interfere with any of the rest of the participants. I just want to also say in passing, so that people are aware, we are recording the meeting on Zoom. And again, it's purely for our own records as a society to have record of the meeting on file. So just that people are aware of that. If people are uncomfortable with it, they'll have to make their own choice, but just so that people are aware of it. Okay, so just while I'm going to share this screen, and just while we are, while I am doing that, I'm just going to do a very short, brief intro on Kilbrittain 100 years ago versus today. I think, look, for most of you out here, you're all locals and know the community. We have some people that may not. I suppose I'd just like to start with 2 slides, which I'm sure our Tidy Towns Committee would be very proud of. The first one, which is the entrance to Kilbrittain. While it looks very well now, if you take it back to this slide, which is probably closer to the 1921 era, you can see what Kilbrittain village looked like then. The building on your left-hand side is the RIC barracks, which we will be hearing about in the presentations. Can you just bear with me a second, because I need to. And on the right, you will see the building, which is also mentioned in some of the presentation this evening, particularly in relation to Paddy Crowley, is the public house, which was Simon McCarthy's at the time, which is across the road from the post office today, which was Crowley's at the time, which again is mentioned in the conversation. So, I suppose there is, Kilbrittain features a lot in the history books, and when you look back at it, you would wonder sometimes, why was Kilbrittain so prominent? But there was from the very early days, from 1916 and the march into Macroom, there was a number of participants from Kilbrittain and that. And if you look at the military records, you will see that from 1917 onwards, and indeed in 1917, you had 2 active training camps in Kilbrittain. One at the Lake House in Maryborough, and the other in Clownboig in O'Brien's. So it was always a hot spot, and I suppose the first event kicked off with the ambush at Rathclarnon, which was a low-key affair, and while there wasn't any fatalities there, it was the first attempt by the volunteers to secure some arms. And that was in 1919. Also, in the end of 1919, you had the shooting of Constable Bolger in Kilbritton village. And then in 1920, you had 2 attempts at the Coast Guard station, again to secure arms, and you had 2 attempts at blowing up the RIC barracks. Which then brings us on to, and sorry, there was another event in February of 21, which was the shooting of Johnston, which was a young lad whose father was an RIC officer, and he was shot as well. He was an innocent victim at the time, I suppose, that was shot by the local volunteer organisations. His father was an RIC officer. His father was dead. But those were a lot of the events that were going on. So when you hear all the likes of that, you say to yourself, my God, January, February, 100 years ago was a very, very active spot in Kilbritton. It was a real hot spot for what was going on. So without further ado, I'm going to just move it along to the first presentation on Daniel O'Reilly by Grania. And then we'll move it to the presentation on Paddy Crowley by Con McCarthy, and then we're going to pause for a little while after that. So just bear with me for a second while we pick up the other slides.
Daniel O'Reilly of Grenassick was born in 1897, was one of 7 children of Grenassick farmer Daniel O'Reilly Sr. and his wife Margaret. In 1911, only their 3 daughters and 2 sons resided with them, Daniel being the youngest son, then aged 14 years. The family occupied a farm of 35 acres in the early 1920s. Daniel Jr. joined the volunteers. He was a member of the Kilbritton Volunteer Company 1st Battalion, Cork 3rd Brigade IRA. Daniel took part in the attack on Kilbritton RIC barracks in December 1920. He was one of 5 riflemen who covered the front of the barracks. In early January 1921, he was involved in a skirmish with the military raiding party near Cois Cross, was also involved in a prepared ambush for military lorries at Maubeg and Lara, Bandon, and in occupying Bandon town with the West Cork Flying Column. Daniel Canty stated on the night of January the 23rd, 1921, the column moved into Bandon to attack a military curfew. On this occasion, one of the parties in charge of Charlie Hurley took up a position on the Dunmanway Road within about 100 yards of the military barracks. Their section was to act as a covering party on the barracks, while the main body of 8 column moved into the centre of Bandon to carry out an attack on the patrol. That section was in position about 11 p.m. and remained until about 3 a.m. when orders were given to open fire on the military barracks. They fired on the barracks for about 10 minutes and were then ordered to withdraw. That section joined the main body later. It was discovered Daniel O'Reilly was missing, later confirmed he had been killed. Dennis O'Brien was in position beside O'Reilly, stated he had heard the signal to withdraw 3 blasts of a whistle, informed O'Reilly and moved off immediately to an agreed meeting place. O'Reilly did not hear the signal and refused to move. Volunteer Patrick O'Brien, adjutant of the Dunmanway Battalion, recalled as he and O'Reilly moved away from the military barracks along the Dunmanway Road, bullets from a machine gun cut sods from the surface of the field just above them. Daniel O'Reilly was killed, caught by full burst from the gun and cut to pieces on the morning of January the 24th. He was the only casualty on the night. The British forces found his body with arms in the field. His identity was unknown by either the police or the soldiers. His body was removed from the military barracks to the workhouse morgue. Daniel O'Reilly was interred in the Republican plot at St. Patrick's Graveyard in Bandon. To conclude, in a later pension claim made by his family, it stated that Volunteer Reilly received a bullet wound, but it had been bayoneted to death.
Thank you, Grania. That is our first slide presentation. And we'll come back to any questions on this just to follow. So we're just going to go on to our second one, which is being presented by Con McCarthy on Paddy Crowley. So without further, I'm just going to go straight on to that.
The first half of February 1921, from the 4th to the 16th of February, are known as the 12 Dark Days. Here in the West Cork Brigade area, 11 volunteers were killed during that period. The first to die was Paddy Crowley from Kilbrittain, who died on the 4th of February 1921. Paddy Crowley was born in the 18th of September 1894 in the Ivy Lodge in Kilbrittain. He was one of a family of 4 boys and 2 girls. The 4 boys were all members of the volunteers, and the girls were members of the Cumann. Paddy Crowley himself was a member of the board of the Bandon Board of Guardians. At that time, Paddy Crowley was ill. He was suffering probably from a suspected appendicitis. He was resting in the home of the O'Neills in Marlborough, and it was intended to move him to Cork Hospital whenever, as soon as it was safe to do so. Also on this morning, here at the 4th of February 1921, the Essex Regiment were carrying out a major search of Kilbrittain and surrounding areas. Early in the morning, they threw a cordon of military from Bannaspittle to Bannadee, onwards south of Bandon, onto Clogach and onto Timoleague. They moved in on Kilbrittain Parish and the surrounding area, searching every house and searching every farm. All the males were questioned, and most of them were arrested and brought to Kilbrittain village, where Major Percival would interview each one of them later. When news arrived in the O'Neill household that this major search was ongoing, Paddy Crowley and one of the O'Neill brothers, Daniel O'Neill, ran from the house. But they'd gone a short distance when they ran straight into Major Percival. Daniel O'Neill was arrested. Paddy Crowley got away for some time. Major Percival jumped up on a gate with a rifle to shoot the fleeing Paddy Crowley. But 2 of the O'Neill sisters tried to pull Major Percival off the gate, catching him by the legs and attempting to knock him from the farm gate. Major Percival began to batter their knuckles and beat their knuckles with the butt of his rifle. Eventually, Major Percival fired off a shot and struck Paddy Crowley, who was now a couple of fields away. Paddy Crowley fell in a field here in the parish of Ardacrow, or in the townland of Ardacrow. In this field there was a crop of either turnips or rape, and Paddy attempted to hide underneath the foliage of the crop or the leaves of the crop. The military descended on the field and searched it drill by drill, walking up and down along the field. Eventually Paddy Crowley was discovered, and Major Percival was called. Major Percival, standing over Paddy Crowley, shot him with a handgun through the head at point-blank range. This killing of an injured volunteer lying on the ground was described by Tom Barry as willful murder. Con Crowley was arrested in Copying on the 21st of November 1920 and taken by the auxiliaries to Macroom Castle. He was later transferred to Cork and from there to Ballykindler. His brother Dennis Crowley was the intelligence officer with the Kilbrittain Company of Volunteers, but he was arrested on the 4th of February, the morning of Con Murphy's death. The fourth brother, Michael Crowley, was an engineering student in University in Cork. He was very, very involved with the volunteers, and he was shot in the face in a Youghal while collecting arms from a unionist house. But he made a good recovery. When the flying column was set up, Michael Crowley, or Mick Crowley as he was known as, was very involved with the flying column. He was a section commander in Crossbarry on the day of Crossbarry ambush. In later life, he qualified after the War of Independence. He qualified as an engineer and worked with Sligo County Council and lived in Enniscrone in Sligo. On that day of the 4th of February, the military party, they had about a week earlier burnt the home of the Crowley family in Ivy Lodge, and they had also burnt the public house, the property of the McCarthy family of Simon McCarthy in Kilbrittain village. Now, on this day, on the 4th of February, they looted a lock-up shop, which was the property of the Crowley parents, and they used about 20 of the arrested men, and they forced them at gunpoint to demolish the shop, the Crowley family shop. They also got another group of men to partly demolish the property of the McCarthy family. On the 5th of February, then, the day after, a military party entered the farm in Leanabh. This farm was the property of Dan Maloney, who was married to an aunt of Paddy Crowley's. Dan Maloney had 3 sons in the volunteers, but all 3 of them were in prison at this stage. But his farm was oftentimes raided by the military. And on this particular day, they shot the elderly man, Dan Maloney, dead on his farm in Leanabh. The body of Paddy Crowley was taken to the O'Neill household, where it was waked, and it was then removed. He was then removed to Kilgock Cemetery, where he was buried with full military honours. Charlie Hurley gave the oration at the grave, but little did Charlie Hurley or these simple people realise that within 6 short weeks that Charlie Hurley would be joining Paddy Crowley in Kilgock Cemetery, because Charlie Hurley was killed on the morning in Ford's house in Ballymurphy on the morning of Crossbarry ambush. This cemetery in Kilgock also holds the graves of William Hurley, Charlie's brother, who died of pneumonia as a result of being on the run, and the grave of Con Murphy from Timoleague, who was killed in Clowndereen, and the grave of Dan Donovan from Kilgock, who died during the Civil War. These volunteers and others, and many others around the country, who gave their lives for Irish freedom. They gave their lives for the privileges that we enjoy today. The people of Kilbrittain and surrounding areas erected a monument to Paddy Crowley in the early 20s. This monument was erected on the roadside at Ardacrow, across the road from the field in which Paddy Crowley was shot. The metal cross on this monument was constructed in the forge of Pam McGrath in the Marsh in Cork City. Some of you will know that Pam McGrath later went on to become a TD representing Cork City for some years. This monument was restored and enlarged, and a stone wall built around it, and a plaque in English placed in it about 20 years ago, or about in 2002. And it was unveiled on that particular Sunday evening by a nephew of Paddy Crowley's, a Michael Crowley from Miniscrone in Sligo.
Thank you very much, Con. And that is our first two presentations there. I think we're big thanks to Con and Grania for spending the time to pulling this together. I'm quite sure there might be people there that will have a look and would like to add something to it, or maybe take something away from it. Who knows? But we'd certainly, look, we'd welcome to any comments or anything that anybody would like to say. So can I maybe open the platform a little bit here, and would anybody like to come in or to make a comment on either of those events, or a comment in general about topics tonight, please? As I say, if you mention your name, I'll be able to take around and get you, if you would, please. Just while people are thinking there, can I just ask one question to you there in relation to Michael Crowley? Michael Crowley is somebody that that we don't hear as much about, but I believe he was very active outside of the Kilbrittain parish, was he?
Yes, Sean, indeed. Michael Crowley was a university student at the time. He and two others, Nudge Cannon and Peter Carney, the three of them were members of the college company of the volunteers, and he would have taken part in activities with the college company and volunteers. For example, on the 28th of February 1921, 5 volunteers from Dripsey that were captured at Dripsey ambush, and 1 from Tipperary were executed. And as a reprisal, Cork number 1 decided that at 7 o'clock on the night of the 28th, that every British soldier that could be found in Cork City would be shot on sight. The college company were allocated the area of Patrick Street. I'm quoting here from Mick Crowley's own witness statement. He states that himself and Eugene and Peter were down by Patrick's Bridge when the chime struck 7, and they shot dead two British soldiers. So and there were a number of other shots on the night, and we will see that from a number of other witness statements there, particularly Frank Busteed's statement, and others verify that as well. So Mick Crowley was very, very involved. He was involved in a huge number of activities with the Flying Column, and he's more active with the column than he was here at home. So he spent most of 21 out with the column.
Okay, can I just, and referring to the chat box here, I would see we have a comment in from John Flannery. I don't know where you are in the audience, John, but would you like to comment? I don't know if you can hear us, John.
I hear you there. Yeah, can hear you fine.
Sorry, John. Yeah, I see you have a comment on the chat box. Maybe not everybody can see it, but rather than I reading it out, would you mind?
It had always struck me that Maud O'Neill's attempt to tackle Percival that day when he was firing on Patrick Crowley and her brother. For an 18-year-old girl, I mean, just incredible. Like the Essex Regiment weren't to be trifled with, and that's for sure, particularly Percival. And for an 18-year-old girl, just like that, to decide that she was going to pull him off his perch, I think was just incredible and typical of the bravery that she showed throughout the whole campaign. I mean, she was never short of, would say, carrying dispatches, guns, whatever, and even, would say, going into Bandon and claiming bodies, would say, volunteers that had been killed. I think for a young girl over years, she played an outstanding part in the whole campaign at that time.
And John, Maud was obviously a very active member of Common Naman as well, was she?
She was, yeah.
I found somewhere a reference to her that she actually spent a month with the column, acting as a first aider for them, and would say doing errands like bringing food and stuff like that to various places where they were camped. And she's the only female that I've come across that actually travelled or anything like that kind of period with the column anywhere.
Thank you, John. And just on that, our April Zoom meeting is we're proposing to dedicate it completely to a discussion about the activities of the Common Naman. So we have a plan to have a full meeting on their activities and their involvement. Anybody else like to come in, folks?
I may.
So you might give your name, or Mort O'Sullivan, yeah, please.
Mort O'Sullivan. I'd just like to thank everybody who has contributed so well and so insightfully here tonight, including the speakers and Con in particular, for the extra information. It is also a fact that Michael Crowley, that there was an attempt to find allegedly buried Fenian guns at Barley Bandon, and some of the local volunteers had cross-trenched the field in which it was believed they were buried without finding anything. And Michael Crowley got the professor of engineering, his own professor, to come out there and using a sort of precursor of I don't know what would you call it, but to see could they locate with the equipment they had at that time any buried weapons or anything like that, which again was unsuccessful, but it was a very early use of that kind of finding technology, which was much more refined and brought more usefully into use maybe 40 or 50 or 60 years later than it. So I thought it just goes to show that he was involved in every possibility and included his own professor to try and find them, even if it wasn't successful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mort. Sean Kelleher, I see you there, and I can't help but pick your brain for a minute. Would you hazard a guess as why, or sorry, give us some background maybe, why was Kilbrittain a particular hotspot, or is there any particular reason why the activities were so strong in Kilbrittain, Sean?
I think, I think that Tom Barry said that Kilbrittain was one of the most best company in Ireland. I think Tom Barry said it was very famous, but I'd like to say, well, they were very spirited. They had great spirit. There was a great camaraderie between them, and they were very nationally minded families. I mean, the Crowley family, for example, are outstanding. I mean, all of them, every single one of them, male and female, were outstanding, and many other ones as well. Can I tell a little funny story about one of the Crowleys? It relates to 1950, where there was a ploughing match in Bandon, and Con was there. Con was quite a character, Con Crowley. And Sean T. O'Kelly was there. He was president at the time. And they were in the hotel in Bandon. And Con went up to Sean T. and he put his arms around Sean T. and he said, although he said, we're the two smallest men here today, he said, we're the two best men though. We're the two best men, though, or we're the two smallest today. A very funny incident. And present also was Mary Ann Murphy from Scave. Mary Ann used to visit us in Crow Hill quite a bit. And she was another character. She claimed to be the girlfriend of Sean Hales, I think, but there's some doubt about that. They were an outstanding family, and I think that area around there produced some extraordinary people. Very, 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 very good, excellent. I mean, Barry rightly gave them the praise I think that they deserved, but there were many others as well, of course, but they were very famous and made a huge contribution. I mean, for example, Mick Crowley, as was pointed out already, was a section commander at Barry. He played a very important part in it. Paddy Crowley, I think, was to be promoted, wasn't he, to commandant of the company when he was to be promoted. When he was killed, it was unfortunately that he was killed by Percival. And of course, Percival, as we all know, was notorious, wasn't he? And Percival wore a bulletproof vest. And one of the he was shot by John Ryan, who was a young man at the time, 19 or 20. Shot at Percival, hit Percival, but Percival was saved, and Ryan got away. I hope I'm not digressing too far on this, but many years afterwards, there was a man called Paddy Cooney, not the Paddy Cooney that was the minister, different Paddy Cooney. He's a journalist in England, based in England. And he rang me one day and he said he was coming to Upton to meet John Ryan, who was very much involved as well, of course. And he came to Upton House, and it was summertime, and John Ryan was well in his 90s, mid-90s at the time. He lived almost to be 100. And he said, this man, Paddy Cooney, the journalist, went to interview John Ryan. And John Ryan, he wouldn't get a word. He didn't say a word. He was looking at him. He was looking at me. He was saying, and after a while, Cooney said to me, you better go over and sit down near him, and you better speak to him. So I went over and I spoke with John Ryan. Of course, John Ryan knew me, and I did the job of interviewing John Ryan about his activities and the shooting of Percival and all that. And Cooney, I think, recorded it. But there's a little incident from, I think when it was sometime the 60s, I suppose, maybe into the 70s. John Ryan lived to be almost 100. But my grandmother on my mother's side was from Kilbrittain. Nora Deneen from my old man, Kilbrittain. And you see, there was a spirit of going way back to the time of the famine, or I should say the great hunger, where the people of Kilbrittain fed many of the people who were starving. One incident that I know of, where this man came along, he was very, very, very weak, and the Ghanaians drew a lot of wheat during that time, and they had bread made and all that. And when they gave him some bit to eat, the meal, the poor man died. He was so weak, he couldn't survive. So there's a spirit going in the people of Kilbrittain going back a long time. And it very much came to the fore during the war for independence, maybe rather than the war of independence, the war for independence, that it came to the fore very well at that time. And we had many of them mentioned today, many famous families mentioned the O'Neills and the Mannings and the O'Briens and the Crowleys, and it's dangerous to start mentioning families because you leave out somebody, but to a person, to a man and woman, they were an extraordinary generation.
Okay,
the other thing I suppose we should say as well, that why were they successful? Why were they able to do what they did and hold ambushes and all that? And I suppose the answer to that is that they had many people behind them. There were very many safe houses in the locality as well. And that was huge. And I mentioned the O'Briens in front. We did the training camp, and that was very important as well, because the question is often asked: how could they have withstood the might of the British, who had all the training? Many of them haven't taken part in the wars and all that. They had the training, they had equipment behind them, and yet the Irish, a small group, many untrained, very little training, but some training, that they were able to hold their own. And of course, they had the courage, but they had the people behind them. I think not all the people, but they had a great number of people behind them, the local community, and that was very
Okay,
important.
Sean, can I just thank you for that. Just one other question that's coming in here onto the chat box as well is that was there a strong Fenian tradition in Kilbrittain Parish? Anybody like to take that up?
Well, I'm not very familiar with all that, but I would suggest that there was a Fenian tradition there. There were, because the volunteers took a lot of their inspiration from the Fenians, and that was true of practically the whole country. The Fenians gave a huge boost to people, and that Fenian tradition lived on. I mean, it was still fairly new at the time of 1920-21. I mean, the Fenian Rising, as everybody knows, 1867 and so on. So there must have been a Fenian tradition that was handed down to the men and women of Kilbrittain.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Any other questions, folks? We'll go on to the third part of our presentation, which is on Krishna Leanabh, and then we'll have a discussion then again. And again, if anybody wants to put a comment in the drop box in the meantime, by all means do. So just bear with us until we bring up the third part here.
At 8 p.m. on a moonlit night of Wednesday, February 16, 1921, Captain Major Percival and Captain Spooner led an Essex Regiment patrol, travelling in 4 cross-sea lorries from Kinsale, with the intention of searching the Clonbuick area of Kilbrittain, as it was the HQ of Kilbrittain Company and Barry's flying column at the time. On their route to Krishna Leanabh from Kinsale, Cork 3rd Brigade volunteers had trenched Kilcobbin Crossroads, approximately 2 miles east of Krishna Leanabh. Because the road was blocked, the Essex Regiment abandoned the Crossleys and continued west on foot. They were ordered to walk on the grass verge and not on the road itself. This reduced the sound their boots would have made had they been walking on the road. Military records showed 2 squads, B1 Kilbrittain Company, were at work on intersecting roads north of Krishna Leanabh during the night of the 11th of February from dawn until 4 p.m. on the 16th of February. 9 Kilbrittain Company volunteers and some volunteers from other companies, having worked on intersecting road trenching nearby for the previous few days, went to Krishna Leanabh and had gone inside the fence of the field to rest and lay in wait for an expected enemy road patrol, knowing they were covered by men on sentry duty. Shortly after 10 p.m, the Essex patrol appeared suddenly and quietly surrounded the volunteers and opened fire rapidly in a surprise attack. The event resembled more a massacre than an ambush. Volunteers were shot and killed instantly, where a lone tree stands to mark the spot. They were Cornelius McCarthy, Kilneatic Ballindy, 29 years old, who was shot through the left eye; John McGrath, Raclarn, Kilbrittain, 24 years old, who was shot through the forehead; Timothy Connolly, Kilbrittain, Varnagart, 24 years old, who was shot through the side of the head. The rest of the volunteers scattered and ran through the fields and headed both south and west of Krishna Leanabh. The 4th volunteer, Quartermaster Jeremiah O'Neill of Cunnapogue, only 19 years old, was shot below the right knee while retreating from inside Coughlin's field. Volunteer O'Neill crawled a distance into the field to a spot where the British couldn't see him, where hours afterwards he bled to death. He was not discovered until the following morning. A lone tree in the ditch marks the spot where Volunteer O'Neill died. The next day, the local Cumann, including John McGrath's sister Mary and Jeremiah O'Neill's mother, identified the bodies, and they were removed to Crowley's farmhouse in Kilneatic, Ballindy, just about 200 yards east of Krishna Leanabh, where they were waked on the night of the 17th of February. John McGrath's sister Mary prepared the body for her brother for burial. The bodies were then removed from Crowley's in 4 horse-drawn carriages to the old cemetery at Clashavana, just northeast of Kilbrittain village, and were buried at 3 p.m. on the 18th of February 1921. It was mostly women and children at the funeral, as it was under watch by armed forces. A week later, the menfolk paid their respects to the dead. After the truce, and in early 1922, the coffins were reinterred to Kilbrittain churchyard under full military honours. The officer in charge of the funeral was Brigadier General Sean Hales. Their burial place is now known as the Kilbrittain Republican Plot. A 5th volunteer, Michael O'Neill, who was killed in April 1922, was buried alongside the men. In 1934, 3,000 people attended the unveiling of a large Celtic Cross memorial on granite plinth in the Republican Plot, where the 4 volunteers were laid to rest. Commemorations for the 4 volunteers have been held at both the Republican Plot and at Leanabh in the years since. The killings occurred during what was known as the 12 Dark Days for the Cork 3rd Brigade.
Thank you, Dennis. Very well done, and obviously a lot of time put into
I
it.
decided I was going to be the world champion bull rider when I was 5 years old. Yeah, and I knew it. I mean, I played being world champion bull rider on the propane tank at this one place we lived, this ranch, and I spurred off the paint off it for a long, long time. But make believe riding, and you know, my older brother Pete, I mean, we did, you know, the normal things brothers do, you know, 18 months, you know, we'd play some games and some sports, and then we'd fight, and then, you know, and I'd lose, and then I need to go off and go ride my bucking barrel by myself, play like I was, you know, big shot, because, you know, I was always winding up second to Pete, you know, in some of our other adventures. And, but world champion bull rider, I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew I was going to be it. You know, so whatever it was going to be, that was me.
Okay, folks, are we back?
Hi, Paul here. Can I say something?
Yes, indeed. Sorry, we had a cross connection there, so we've hopefully tidied that up. So yes, Paul, go ahead. Yeah.
The photograph of Sean Hales that was shown there, I believe I have the original, and it was published in the journal there the last time out when I did an article about my people who are the Ballinadee Brickyard Crowleys. I found it in my mother's memorabilia, and she had written on the back of it, John Hales, R.I.P., Kinsale Barracks. Am I so?
Yeah, certainly, Paul. We acknowledged. I think Con, you may be able to come in on this one here, but you have the original, John, and it's the only. This is where he's wearing a left armband.
He is indeed.
Which is a unique photograph that hasn't been published anywhere else, I believe. Is that right, Con?
That's correct, yes, except in our journal.
Yes.
And it's a very, very interesting one. He looks kind of very sad. It's just a small Kodak, but I had it photo edited by a friend, and it really is a very haunting photograph of Sean Hales. Must have been the last one of him. My mother knew all the Haleses. She was from Ballinadee, of course, but I think that was taken in August, and that he was wearing the armband for Mick Collins.
That's correct.
Is that so? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's probably. He died. He was killed himself in December, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, indeed, Paul. You're correct in that. We believe that the armband was
he was worried in sympathy as a result of the death of Michael Collins on the 22nd of August. And he died himself, as you stated, on the 7th of December, 1922.
Right. There's another interesting thing about that. I just interjected. My mother was a girl, grew up down there, and she Sean was at Kinsale Barracks, but it was Tommy Kelleher who had vacated it shortly before. And Tommy was a cousin of my mother's. And when she was back on holidays there, around about that time, the Civil War was on, and she met Tommy near her home at the Brickyards in Kilgobbin with a column of soldiers. He asked her if she had seen any soldiers. She said no. And then he took the troop across the Bandon there by Kilgobbin Castle. And that's how Tommy Kelleher went down into Kinsale at that time.
Okay, John, and thank you for the opportunity to publish that photograph for a first time, because it wasn't used anywhere else, which is very unusual, going by the profile that he had. Dennis, can I just ask you, I'm always very interested in the story that when they removed the bodies from the old graveyard in Kilbrittain, they took what we would class now as an unusual route to Kilbrittain. Is that right? Or did they didn't come up the village as we know it today, did it? Sorry, Dennis, you're on mute.
Yeah, Sean, they went over it's believed they went over the Derry Road and past the modern cemetery, we'll say, and that's the route they took up to the Republican plot itself, rather than coming up through the village. That's the story, and as it goes, you know.
And the reason being, well, some would say is that they did not want to pass the RIC barracks. Is that right? Or was the RIC barracks active that time?
That would have been active. Yeah, that was kind of the key reason why they didn't want to. I suppose in the funeral cortege, it was mostly women and children anyway. So like the men couldn't take the risk of being seen in the vicinity, especially when the area is being under armed surveillance. So. You know, I think they didn't want to give away any information either to the British, you know, of any of the families concerned or their relatives, like, so that was, yeah, that Con might have something there on that as well.
Yeah, just to come in there, Sean, when they were reinterred, that we think, though we have the definite date, but we think was probably on the anniversary of their death, and we think it would have been February 1922, and the treaty would have been signed. Or the Dáil would have ratified the treaty in January of 22, but the RIC were still in barracks until probably March or thereabouts. Now, I'm aware there are much better historians present tonight than myself, but I think so. I think they didn't want to dishonour the memory of the 4 dead volunteers by walking up past the RIC station, which was still inhabited by RIC at that time. So they came up the Derry Road, and across what was known as the Mass Pat, which would be through the Dolly Farm and onto the road somewhere not too far, I think, from the graveyard and up to the church, somewhere in that general. But I think the Mass Pat is long gone now, but it crossed over the river there at the south side of the area road. And Sean Hales would have been in charge on that particular day. And I believe that they fired a volley of shots on 3 occasions between leaving the graveyard and coming to the Republican plot.
Thank you, Con. Sorry, and I shouldn't do this, I know, but Trevor, I saw a comment on the chat box on relation to a link that you posted. Maybe for those that can't see it, would you care to give us a comment on it?
Hi, Sean. It's just a comment about Krishna Leanabh in a recent part there on the Irish Times. I can share it to everyone if you want. I shared it with you privately.
Okay.
But there is a comment actually about Krishna Leanabh from, it was quoted to Dennis Collins's statement in the Bureau of Military History. I'll actually put up the link to the Dennis Collins' statement on the Bureau of Military History through the Military Archives, and I'll also put up the link there to the Irish Times, and I think it's self-explanatory. There are, well-known historians here. I'm just I'm working with Dermot Begley on something at the moment, and I just bow to their knowledge of things. I just collate the information, but it won't be for tonight, but it might be interesting reading for all the listeners here tonight, just to give a background information to some of the things on Krishna Leanabh.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. And I also see a comment here from William O'Driscoll, who says that his granduncle John O'Reilly informed the IRA as they were trenching outside of his house that the English had crossed the bridge in Kinsale. And cleared the obstruction as they ignored him. Probably because he was a Redmondite, Willie says. I was glad to see that the Toomey Girls article in the Star mentioned how Nate Barrett informed the column and they ignored him. So that's some facts from the O'Driscoll family. Anybody else like to comment or anything else? I see a comment from another participant who says that well, I think this is confirmed later. The infamous Major Percival ended up surrendering Singapore to the Japanese in 42. Asking if that was correct. I think that's well documented as being the highlight of Mr. Percival's career. Anyone else like to come in?
The guns were all pointed out to sea, I believe, and the Japanese came down by land. That did for Major Percival, and it ruined British authority in the East, no doubt about that.
Yes.
Sean, just in relation to a question there on chat I saw earlier about how many Essex soldiers were present there. There was a court of inquiry held under oath at Kinsale 3 days after the attack. There was 2 officers involved in the attack, according to the records, Captain Spooner and Percival. And in Spooner's testimony, he mentions how they advanced in 3 parties of 1 officer and 6 other ranks. The way that works out, that's about 21 soldiers in total. That's including both Percival and Spooner themselves. And they split that 21 into 2 parties that lined either side of the road approaching Krishna Leanabh. The common idea was that they were supposed to walk on foot after dismounting the Crossleys at Kilgovan, that they'd walk on foot on the grass verge, so to minimize the noise on approaching Krishna Leanabh. I suppose they would have been as surprised as the volunteers were surprised, because they expected a scout patrol. They just didn't know where or how close to Clonbuig. Their intention was to raid Clonbuig. So basically that was it. I think the record showed about 21 soldiers is what's in Spooner's own in his own testimony.
Yeah, I mean, when you put the timeline together and go back to the events as we mentioned from Rathclarnon on to Daniel O'Reilly and on to Paddy Crowley, and then you had this massacre in Krishna Leanabh, and as we know, it continued on. And the age of these people, I mean, 19, 20, 21, it was a serious takeout at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Like, I mean, Jeremiah Neal was only 19 at the time, and I suppose a lot of people question why was he sergeant, when he was a lot younger than the other men. But he'd seen a lot of action prior to that with the Britain Company. Like from 1918 right into 1921, he took part in Rathclarnon ambush. He took part in the attempted attack on Inishannon RIC barracks, and also in the 2 attacks on the Kiverton RIC barracks as well. And even during the attack on the Bannon barracks in 1921, he went through barbed wire entanglements with explosive charge, which he affixed to the barracks gateway, and the opening which would have set off the charge. And even he retrieved some of the same charge before the column retired. So, he was a fairly fearless lad for his age, and obviously I'd say that the men must have looked up to him, even though he was only 19. And it must have been awful as well, I think, for his mother to recover his body the following day. I know my grandaunt Frances Ryan would have, in her own testimony here, I'll just get it here now. She said that she said that she helped remove 4 corpses of the volunteers killed during the manoeuvres Krishna Leanabh, and made necessary arrangements for burial and took part in the funeral. and she disarmed one of them, which was O'Neill, and he had 2 revolvers and ammunition, and I saved him, in her own words. His leg was broken, there was an explosive bullet in his leg, and it seemed that he crawled down to this place and the military did not find him the first time. And Frances saved all his belongings the following morning. She could see that he was dead where he'd crawled down, and she added that in fact the military were only within 2 fields of her, so even while she was searching for the body, the military weren't too far away. So like it was a fairly precarious situation, even the Cumann na Món, and I noticed myself, even just researching the story, that the Cumann na Món played a huge role in recovering the bodies and preparing them for burial. You know, I don't think they quite get the appreciation or the praise that they deserve, because they did a lot of selfless work, you know, looking after the volunteers while the volunteers after the run, and preparing billets and food and changing clothing for them. So yeah, that's one thing that struck me researching the story of Leanabh, just the involvement of women in the events afterwards, you know.
And just there, Sean, if I can come in there, Sean, on the day of the 16th of February, from dawn in the morning until 4 o'clock, 9 of the volunteers who were later to be in Leanabh, they spent the day, they were after trenching intersecting roads at Leanabh, which is about a mile west of Leanabh. And they remained, and the bridge on the main road going down to Kilbrittain had also been demolished. So they were hoping that a lorry supplying food at the Kilbrittain barracks would come their way. So they remained in an ambush position from dawn until 4 p.m. on the 16th. I'm reading that here out of Dennis Crowley's statement. And now, when they left there, as they were walking to Leanabh, they came into 9 of them came into the O'Sullivan household here in Connaught. And Murty and Michael O'Sullivan's mother gave him the supper here, and then they proceeded on to Leanabh. And the 4 who were killed were included in that 9 people. So again, it goes along with what Dennis is saying there, the work that the women did and by the females behind the scenes, and maybe they're often not recognised for it, you know, and they don't get the recognition and the effort. And also, it would have been the Cumann na Món who actually contacted Michael Reilly, who he was after setting up his undertaking business in Bandon, Michael O'Reilly from Kilgobbin, and he had set up his undertaking business in Bandon a short time previously. And the Cumann na Món contacted him, and he sent out the 4 coffins for the 4 volunteers to Crowley's house in Killineatic, in which they were buried. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
Thank you, Con. Just an interesting comment there on the chat as well is coming from John. He says, Percival contacted Liam Deasy and Tom Barry sometime in the 50s and asked him to meet with him in Dublin. Deasy initially was willing to meet him, but Barry told Deasy that if he met Percival, he would never again speak to him. So, sorry, Sean, yeah? You're on mute, Sean. You might unmute yourself first, please. Yeah.
It was a disastrous event, wasn't it, in Leanabh, just the day after Upton, 3 killed in Upton, 4 in Leanabh.
Roger.
His brothers were killed, and as you say, 11 were killed in a very short time. But I'm just wondering, what cover had they? I mean, they were digging the trench on the road because they'd normally have cover. There would be people watching out to see where were the British and all that. But what happened? Something went wrong in Leanabh. Can anybody throw any light on that, I wonder?
I just think, Sean, that they were probably expecting the lorries to come. That the trench at Kilgobbin, the lorries were abandoned at Kilgobbin, and the military were walking the 2 dikes of the road, so they came silently. I think that's one thing. I think the factor that 9 of those were in an ambush position from dawn that morning until 4 o'clock has to be another factor. Tiredness and fatigue had to be a factor as well. So I think these were factors, you know, but like there is written proof that they were in ambush position from 4, and I'm reading it here, the volunteers trenched intersecting roads at Leanabh and they laid an ambush from dawn until 4 p.m. on the 16th, and the following men, and there's 9 named, and the 4 who died are among those 9 people who were, so they were in ambush from dawn until 4 p.m. Or thereabouts, and they then left that position, had a meal, and then went to Leanabh. So fatigue would probably have been an issue. The fact that the lorries, which normally would have been making a sound to the moonlit night, we know that from Jimmy Walsh and others, that was a moonlit night, and the lorries would have been making a sound of the diesel engines. Obviously, the lorries were parked, the lorries were 2 miles away, and were walking silently. So I think there was a number of factors, and it was a terrible tragedy, but I think there were a number of factors.
Okay, anybody else like to come in, lads? I can see plenty historians there around the tables.
If I could come in there, perhaps.
Certainly, yeah.
I'd just like to confirm what Con McCarthy said there about where the lads had their last supper, if you like, in his place, which was my grandfather Murty O'Sullivan's place at that time. And my mother would have been one of the people making the supper for them. And then when the unfortunate news came the following day, and the people were being waked in Crowley's house, my grandfather went along to the wake, obviously, because at this stage he knew the people who had been killed the night before. And when he was there, he met an English soldier. I'm not sure who, but the soldier asked him, why was he going to the wake? And he said, because he had heard that people had been killed there and were being waked. And he said, did you know them? Of course, he knew them all, naturally. But nobody would tell the British anything that time, because for the very good reason that they usually treated the relatives of killed volunteers abominably. That was our own experience here too. But he said, no, he said he didn't know them. And he said, why did you go to the soldier? Just because I heard that people had been killed and I want to see, did I know them? So, and then I also heard my mother saying that when they were buried first in the old graveyard in Clashevania, that it was old men made the grave. Maybe the young men were staying scarce because of the British presence again or whatever, but it was old men made the graves for the 4 volunteers in Clashevania, and my grandfather Murty would have been one of them. I forgot to ask who else took part, but just to confirm basically what Con McCarthy said there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murty. Just a question, and it's related to one of the questions on the chat box. And I don't know, Father Crimin, if you're still with us here, and if you just would have any comment on, was it unusual or is it unusual to have a Republican burial plot in church grounds? Is that something that was in other parts of the country, or was this only West Cork? I don't know if anybody would like to take up that question. I don't know if Father Jody is with us. Okay, anything else? Any other questions?
Just in relation to that last point, the only other one I'm aware of is in Scariff, County Clare, where the 4 men that were shot in the bridge at Killaloe, known as the Scariff Martyrs, they're actually buried in the church grounds as well in Scariff, in the Republican plot there.
Okay.
Sean,
it wasn't common practice, John, was it?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I said that one in Clare is the only other one that I have heard of.
Okay.
Sean, I believe that the priest here in Kilbrittain was I think was he Father O'Leary? I think he was he O'Leary, I think, and he had just come here in 21, and I think he was from Turnan, maybe Parkmore in Temple Martin, and I think he was the priest, and of course it would have been Bishop Collin would have been the bishop at the time. But like you know, it was a huge honor to have them buried in the church grounds. Like on the other side of the churches, we all know a number of priests are buried.
Yes, yeah. Mort, I don't know if that's an old sign you have up there, or do you want to come in with a comment?
No, I can't get rid of the hand sign I have up there.
That's okay. We'll excuse us if we're ignoring you. Any other comments, folks, or anyone want to?
Could I ask Con a question? Con, were the volunteers, were they not all excommunicated by Colin at that time? So it must have been very unusual to be allowed to be buried in the church grounds.
They were, but I wonder, would excommunication have been lifted when the truce was signed? I'm not sure. I bow to more experienced people and more knowledgeable people than that. Because again, they were excommunicated again during the Civil War, but like when the War of Independence, or when the truce was called in July of 21, I'm you know, but definitely I don't think that the parish priest here would have been allowed to give a plot here in church grounds without permission of the bishop. I'm only speculating,
yeah.
but I believe. And maybe one other thing there, Michael, while we're speaking, is there's another person here, and we were talking about the role of females here, but there was another person here during the War of Independence and should never be forgotten, and that was Dorothy, Dr. Dorothy Stamford. Later, Dorothy Stamford Price. She married Price later, and she was a Church of Ireland doctor, one of the very few females who were doctors at the time, and her first posting was here to Kilbrittain, here a dispenser here in Kilbrittain. And she came from a unionist background. She was a Church of Ireland background, but she very, very quickly became very, very friendly with many of the IRA here. She taught them first aid. She treated a lot of them. She told about Denny Manning that she showed them how to put a tourniquet on your arm if you were damaged, you were bleeding profusely, how to curb the bleeding. And she took a small bit of string, and Denny Manning left her. She said, God, Caroline, let me in the string would be over my arm. So she wrapped a piece of string around Denny Manning's arm, and she put a pencil. She put a pencil into the piece of string and turned it 3 or 4 times, and nearly cut off his arm. And from there on, the volunteers had ferocious time for her. They realised she knew exactly what she was talking about. There's another story told in the O'Brien household in Crown Broid that the Major Percival was about to burn the house, and the old man was alive, but he was in bedridden upstairs, and Percival ordered he be taken out. And Dr. Percival arrived on horseback, and she challenged Percival, and she told him she'd blacken his name all over the British papers, and that she had the contacts to do so. And Percival backed off and didn't burn the household, and got into his Costa Tinder and went south the road, very, very angry man. So later on, she became very famous. Like she was involved, I think, with Dr. Lynn in Dublin, in St. Ultran's Hospital. But she did a lot of research on the BCG vaccine, and she did quite a bit of research in it. She had a practice herself, I think, in Fitzwilliam Square or Fitzwilliam Place in Dublin, and she was quite involved with Dr. Noel Brown in the rolling out of the BCG vaccine. As we know, like TB had decimated our people up to that time. She married a guy, Price. Then she became a very strong Republican herself, and her husband Price was actually Free State, but apparently had a very happy marriage. And she died a relatively young woman. But she's worth remembering here. She was well known here during the War of Independence. She was here during the peak of the War of Independence. She treated everybody of all classes and creeds here. And a lot, there's a book out on her, and a lot is written about her. So that's Dr. Dorothy Stamford Price.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Con. I just think on our journal part 1 and 2 features very strong chapters on Dorothy Stamford Price and her activities in Ireland. Or sorry, activities in Britain, I should say. Okay, so we're gone almost an hour and a half. I'm conscious that we have held on to 84 out of 86 participants. And before people will start pulling out and winding back, I just want to thank everyone for their participation. In particular, to thank our three presenters for the time of getting the slides together and putting the time into presenting this, because what it does really is it sets a forum for us to talk and to work around. I think the guests or the speakers would also like to give a very big thanks to Triona O'Sullivan for her work in presenting, putting it together, because it's fine to have all the facts and details, but you need somebody with the know-how and the ability to put it together in an understandable way. I'd like to thank everyone that joined us on the chat box. Along the side, there's a lot of comments and a lot of conversation going on. It just shows how interested people are on it. We said an hour to an hour and a half. I think, you know, again, we'd just like to try and keep as close as we can to our deadlines for our first event. We will be doing another one on the 15th of March, which is is commemorating Charlie Hurley and the Crossbarry ambush. Similar style, maybe 2 video clips, 10 to 15 minutes each, and a conversation around each one of them. That's our March one, and April is on Coming the Man, and then we'll have another one in May and in June, and hopefully we'll be able to get back out again. But look, you know, it's an ill wind that doesn't bring some good. We think we're in a crisis with COVID, but think of this day 100 years ago. There was 4 shot in Leanabh. There was a couple more, you know, Paddy Crowley shot in Marlborough. Then Reilly shot in Bandon. It was very, very, very hot and aggressive around us. So maybe we now know how lucky we are. I want to draw everything to a close and thank you again for your participation. Before you leave, if you want to put any other comments in the chat box, by all means do, because we welcome any comments that would help us in improving what we're doing. And thank you very much for everybody for joining. So I'll close the meeting, and we look forward to seeing you all again in March.
Thank you very much. Perfect. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks a lot, Sean.
Thank you.
Right, Sean. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jarrett.
Good, Sean. Good.
No, thank you.
Well, we'll have to have.
Excellent.
Right, there we go. And leave now. Yeah.
I'm just going to leave the link open for a little while if anybody wants to go in and put in any contributions to that chat box, so that we can learn from it.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Con.
John, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Trev.
You can, yeah.
Sean, will you give me a ring when you have a chance?
Yeah, can you hear me, Cam? Yeah, no, I've been muted there. I was just wondering, Cam, maybe in 10 minutes or so, would we do a quick Zoom between the 6 of us? Yeah, so what I do is I'll just send the text there to the 8 people on WhatsApp, and maybe in 10 minutes time, we'll start a new one there for a few minutes. I'll email the link. Now the link will come in the same as before. Okay, talk to you about it.
Sean, will we just stay online or will you send out another notice?
I'll send you out another one, Michael.
Right.